State Board of Education meeting. Merrick Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. I want to welcome all board members, advisors, staff, and on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. I remind the audience and those listening that this body meets monthly with its official meeting scheduled for the first Thursday of the month. Committee meetings were held on Wednesday prior to the official meeting day, as was the case yesterday when the board met to discuss its committee agenda items. I remind our on-site visitors and online listeners that you can follow the meeting online and see all of our materials by going to SBE meetings at www.ncpublicschools.org. Our September agenda was approved yesterday, so we'll proceed under that approved agenda. Board members, you're reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. At this time, I'll call on my colleague, Ms. Amy White, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. White.
Colleagues, before we stand, we'd be remiss if we didn't take time to pause and remember that 8 years ago next week, our nation was attacked in a bombing in New York City in 2011. So today, as we say the pledge, I want to remember those lives that were lost for the freedoms for which we stand underneath our flag and our U.S. Constitution. I want us to remember our state and the states in the Southeast that have been under siege from storms, and the men and women who work in our armed forces and relief agencies that serve our state for the betterment of all. So today, as we say the pledge, let us do so with fervor and remembrance. Will you stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. White. Yesterday, our new student advisors began their service to the board, and we're thrilled to have the student voice and perspective back at the board table. At this time, we'd like to formally welcome Ms. Meredith Gaskell and Mr. Nate Colt-Tomberlin to their student advisory roles, and we'd like to invite them to make a few comments before coming forward.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Meredith Gaskell, and I'm a senior at Carson High School in the Rowan Salisbury school system. I'm very involved in a wide range of areas at my school. I'm president of our leading service organization, Interact Club, and I'm also a member of other clubs such as Student Council, Leadership Team, and National Honor Society. Along with these, I started a service-based club this year named Heroes that is devoted to empowering women in our community and at school. I am very passionate about helping others and especially helping students fulfill their full potential. I'm a varsity cheerleader, and I'm also involved with different arts at my school such as chorus and dance. I was thrilled when my principal sent me the application for the senior advisor role because I am passionate about sharing my voice and being involved in decisions that matter. I have grown up in a home where education is highly valued and discussed on a regular basis. My mom is an accounting professor and my sister teaches high school English. Some of you have asked my plans after graduation, so I know that I plan on attending a North Carolina school, but I'm undecided on exactly what to study. Side note, it is crunch time for me, so I'm open to suggestions. I'm so honored to be part of this group, and I'm excited about the opportunity to learn and contribute. The public school system is so important to me because my entire formal educational experience has been in a North Carolina public school, so I've experienced firsthand how my peers and I are being prepared for life after a high school diploma by being immersed in communities that mirror the real world. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to working with each of you.
Thank you.
Good morning, board members and advisors. My name is Nate Colt-Tomberlin. I am a student at Apex High School. I am a honors and AP student. I'm on the All-A Honor Roll, and I also play varsity lacrosse at Apex. I applied to be the student advisor because my family values public education, and I believe that I can bring a fair and balanced view of my peers to the board, as well as offer the board a wide variety of student opinion. My goal is to provide my opinion, as well as that of my peers, in an honest manner, and one that has the intentions of improving my generation's educational experience, as well as that of those that will come after me. And I'd like to thank you all for this great opportunity, and I'm excited to work with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Please come forward. We'd love to make a picture with you. Right here. Broke the camera.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Nice to have you on the team.
Thank you.
Hey, nice job. Nice job.
Thank you.
What's gonna do?
So we now come to our special recognitions, a time on our agenda where we recognize significant awards, proclamations, resolutions, and those who make a difference in the lives of our students each day. This month, attending our meeting from the Western RESA is Dr. Kimberly Elliott from Jackson County. The RESAs are an important stakeholder group, and we thank them for their feedback. Today, we have the privilege of acknowledging a school that has received STEM recognition, and I call on Mr. Howard Ginsberg to lead the presentation.
Good morning, Chairman Davis. Superintendent, he's not with us yet, but other members of State Board, advisors, special guests, thank you for being here this morning. I'm pleased to stand before you so we can recognize the 2019 STEM School of Distinction. Our focus is on preparing globally ready students, and STEM Schools Distinction Program does hold schools to incredibly high standards. This assures the resulting distinction is truly that, a well-earned testament to the amazing educational practices set in place that benefit students, schools, and our communities. I'm extremely honored today to announce that after rigorous scrutiny and close examination of the STEM educational practices established by our program, we have had one school emerge this year as a model STEM school of distinction. I'd like to ask the faculty and students that are here today from Envision Science Academy in Wake Forest to rise so they can be recognized before the State Board of Education and all others that are gathered here today. Envision Science Academy represents the 30th publicly funded North Carolina STEM school to receive the STEM School of Distinction recognition through this past 5 years. We have several members of Envision Science Academy's Board of Directors in attendance. We also have Executive Director Dr. Charles Fuller, STEAM Coach Bill Prentice, and the Dean of the Lower School, Erica Prentice. Ms. Prentice and two Envision students, Sia and Haley, are going to share some brief comments about Envision Science Academy here in Wake County.
Thank you for inviting us here today. My name is Erica Prentice. I'm the Dean of the Lower School at Envision Science Academy. Envision Science Academy is a K-8 public charter school in Wake Forest, North Carolina. This STEM review process has been a rigorous, yet extremely rewarding experience. Envision Science Academy has used the rubric as a tool for comprehensive self-reflection and growth from our very first year. The STEM implementation rubric has helped us to enhance our project-based learning curriculum, as well as our business and community partnerships. It has also been a valuable tool to collect data to drive our school improvement plan and process. We've had an incredible year as a school this past year at Envision. We've been honored to receive the designation as a Model STEM School of Distinction, which we are now only one of 2 public charters in the state to receive that, and less than 10 in the entire state of North Carolina as a public school to receive that level of designation. We just recently received our report card letter of an A, and have also received one of the highest growth rates in the state of North Carolina. We're very proud of what we've accomplished, but we will certainly continue to push ourselves to reflect and grow for the benefit of our students. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Haley Garza and I am in 5th grade and I am here to talk about my school, Envision Science Academy. ESA is a STEAM school. STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. My school uses project-based learning to help students like me learn. Project-based learning is good for students because it keeps us engaged for the whole entire class period. Also, project-based learning gives you a chance to build your teamwork skills, which is useful for our future jobs. Also, projects help us understand the topic more, which means we get better grades. As you can see, ESA is a great school with lots of opportunities, such as Student Ambassador, which gives 4th and 5th graders, students a chance to build confidence in their speaking skills and give tours to future ESA families. There is also Safety Patrol, which gives 4th and 5th graders a chance to lend a helping hand to staff, so teachers don't have to worry about student safety as much as they already do. As you can see, ESA is a great school. Thank you for your time.
Hello everyone, my name is Sia Bhatia and I'm in 8th grade. I've seen Envision grow as a school throughout the years. Since 4th grade, Envision has given me so many opportunities to grow as a student and become a leader. Envision has given me a spectacular education. The teachers pay attention to my specific learning style and provide me with ample opportunities for learning with advanced classes. At Envision, my favorite part of learning is the projects. Especially the 1 year I didn't have art, the form of learning gave me an outlet to combine education with creativity. In addition to my classes, Envision has given me a chance to grow as a leader. Even as a tiny 5th grader and safety patroller, I learned how to follow a schedule and speak with students and parents. I've done recycle rallies, student ambassadors, and student government. And this year I am Vice President of National Junior Honor Society and plan to participate in Model UN. All of these extracurriculars, balanced with dance and competitive gymnastics, have challenged me, but it gives me the opportunity to become more involved in the school in creative ways. People would always say middle school was the worst, but I honestly am having a very good time in middle school. Thinking back to all the memories that I made with friends and the teachers that I grew close to, I'm very sad to leave Envision next year on to high school, but I am thankful to be part of such a great school that has taught me so much. Thank you for your time.
If there were any questions too that we can answer any about the STEM process, about our school, we certainly can turn that over while we still have a couple minutes. Yeah, come on, please.
For both of you, what are some of the special projects that you worked on? You talked about project-based learning.
Last year, I did a project in STEAM on Shark Tank, so we had to learn about economics and how to sell a product and advertise and all of that. And we had to make a product and present it in front of our teachers, and they would decide if they wanted to invest in our project or not. I decided to do a bracelet, and I got invested in. And that was pretty good.
For me, I would say we do something called International Festival. So we get into groups, so it's a collaborative project, and we have a country. So it's also collaborative between all of our classes. So for science, we would learn about the climate, and so we would have to create a presentation on that. And then in social studies, about the people and the culture. And then in math, there are like statistics on like economy and things like that. And we would put together a whole presentation, and we would have one day, and we could dress up like in that kind of, in their culture ways, and present to the school.
Thank you. Very impressive. So it's never too young to think about a career pathway. So have any of your project-based learning assignments or any of the things that you've just described kind of set you on the possibility for a particular career pathway?
Told you we'd get hired today.
I would say that science, I'm not exactly sure what I want to do, but science is kind of my favorite right now because every time we do something science related, especially this year when we're doing more labs, it's like really interesting for me, and I love science class a lot.
I'm not very sure what I want to do when I grow up either, but last year I took a great interest in math because I had a wonderful teacher who sparked my enjoyment of math. So I might do a math career when I grow up.
I love that. Thanks for sharing.
Awesome.
So it's my understanding that today is Haley's birthday. Happy birthday. Thank you for presenting to us on your birthday.
Well, thank you so much. We'd love for your entire team to come forward and make a picture together. Congratulations. Great job.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations
Thank
so
you.
much.
Good job.
Weren't you?
Girls, why don't you?
I was gonna say follow-up question.
Come on down, Steve.
Appreciate what y'all are doing. Thank you. Howard,
Come on down. We'll stand behind you.
No, y'all come right here in the center.
Yeah, you guys go front and center. Portia Rowland, will you guys come over here? So we're all gonna squeeze in.
Yeah, right here, big row. All guys in the back. Hey, wait, hey, come on, come on. Come on. There's room in the back, come on.
There's plenty of room. Do another row.
Members of the school.
I like symmetry, so scoot that banner that way so it won't be cattywampus in the picture.
Hold that above. There you go. In front of your face.
Yeah, we can draw that.
Hold it up. Drop this. Oh, hold it up. Oh, you gotta hold it up. No, block your face.
Want me to hold it?
Like right here.
There you go.
Or
You want me to hold it?
Yep. You guys hold the sign. Okay.
All right, good.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Great things.
Thank you. Come visit. Open invitation. Right up the road. Right up the road. Thank you for your time.
Your kissing? My 8-year-old is all STEM. It's almost like childhood STEM, like like a robust childhood. All kids are STEM. I mean, it's
Language.
yeah. I mean, like that's our natural disposition. So like to be curious, to explore the world, to learn how things work.
Okay, congratulations to ESA. We're delighted with all the terrific things you're doing and look forward to learning more about your success in the future. So thank you. Come anytime. Next, I'll turn to Ms. Cecilia Holden for a legislative update. Welcome, Ms. Holden.
Good morning.
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 In the interest of time, I'm going to touch on a few bills that remain of high interest this session. But in addition to that, you have meeting materials that you can reference later. Those are simply for your own good if you want to go back and figure out what bills became session law or where certain bills are that we've discussed over the session. Those should be updated in that reference materials. I will point out there is one error that's in there that will be corrected, and I will give the updated materials to Deanna. It's simply where one of the bills is. Senate Bill 5 has actually not concurred in the Senate, and they've re-referred it over to the Ed Committee. So just wanted to point out that's a minor error, but I didn't want you to have materials that are not fully accurate. Where are we in the session? We still do not have a new approved biennium budget. And as mentioned last month,
the General Assembly has moved forward in passing mini budgets. One of the mini budgets that specifically speaks to K-12 education is House Bill 426, and that bill was for educators' pay increases and retiree supplements. That particular bill is the only bill that could not be amended, and so after the House did a second reading that passed, they decided to send it back to the House Appropriations Committee. And when it was sent back to the House Appropriations Committee, I think that the intention is to try to make sure that all of the elements that were in that bill end up in a different mini budget bill that can essentially make it all the way through the General Assembly. So that particular one would grant 1% pay increases to your non-certified staff. It would give annual leave of 5 days. It requires DPI to study and report out on regional, LEA, and school level employment and salary data specific for school psychologists and school counselor positions. It would also require state agencies to report out to the Office of State Budget Management on the use of lapsed salaries. And then finally, it provides a one-time or a 1.5% one-time cost of living supplements for retirees. One of the bills that did make it through is House Bill 226. That bill was actually signed into law by the governor. The items included in that bill include a 2.5% increase effective July the 1st of 2019, and that would be for state employees, including your DPI employees. The intent is also to receive the same level of increase again this time next year. Part-time employees would receive a prorated amount. What is not included in any of these mini budget bills at this time is teacher pay increases. So it is anticipated that that will come out separately, but that's not included in anything at this point. The House Bill 226 also includes the 5 additional days of annual leave. House Bill 924, teacher contract changes. This is a bill that I reported out on last month. This bill actually has been signed into law. This is the bill that, in addition to language that clarifies the amount of time a teacher must work for an LEA to actually become eligible for employment contract, this is the bill that also includes the course requirement for economics and personal finance as a graduation requirement. I'm bringing it back to your attention. There was some information that was released in the media that was not accurately portrayed, so I wanted to clarify what the expectations are of this legislation. The beginning with 9th grade students who enter into high school starting in 2020, 2021, that's the student population that would begin to have this as a high school requirement. Work is currently underway this school year to develop the course with aligned resources, training for teachers, and aligned assessments and or credentials for teachers and for students. The State Board Committee is who's overseeing this work is going to be involved in the policy discussions and will bring back to the board things once they're finalized. So on that, I'll hit pause and ask JB, do you have any other updates that you want to add on that one, or did that cover?
No, I think that covers it. I think some of the clarity about what's actually, when the start date is and when this is going. Mr. Chairman, I assume this will come through SLA.
Correct.
We'll be ready to tackle it and make sure it's a great course for our students and workable for our teachers.
Thank you. Tom Tomberlin and Andrew Syberg have touched on House Bill 107, which is the bill that speaks to educator preparation programs. They gave a lot of information on that yesterday, so I'm not going to get into the details of it. I would like to highlight some due dates that are imposed on the state board in legislation, and to spell out that the DPI senior leadership has indicated that we do not need an extension on these dates, so the board should be looking for board materials coming in the next few board meetings. One of those reports is by October the 1st, and this was the thing that was referred to yesterday, is that the board had to adopt the rule and report to report out on the rule to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee, and the rule would apply beginning with data collected from 2018-19 academic year for the purposes of the annual report made available to the public by December the 15th of 2019, and then have to report out on this every year thereafter. The other thing that was spelled out in Senate Bill 599 that was passed in legislation in 2017, this is what has been referred to as the Educator Preparation Program Dashboard, and the legislation requires that the state board create the report card in a common format for each EPP, and at a minimum that it summarize the information collected in the annual performance reports and make the report cards available to the public through the state board's internet website on an annual basis beginning December 15th of 2019. So those are some dates that are coming before you. So Deanna's aware of these, and we'll be working to try to make sure that they end up on the board agenda in the timely fashion. Senate Bill 621, this is the Testing Reduction Act of 2019. This, as a reminder, I reported on this one last month as well, and this is the bill that would eliminate the North Carolina final exams and reduce tests administered to students in public schools. The bill also includes a couple of other fixes. One of those is specific to Senate Bill 219, which is the teacher licensure bill, and that clarifies that the limited license also applies to teachers with a residency license or lateral entry license. It also includes fixes for Senate Bill 399, which is the bill that would allow retired teachers to return to the classroom in certain situations. The bill was sent to the governor for his signature on August the 28th. So we will see in the next few days whether or not that's going to become law. Per the DPI senior leadership, I did request on behalf of the board to get an update for the board in regards to what the impacts would be. Per the DPI senior leadership, the conference version, this is the one that actually went forward to the governor, will not have a direct impact on school performance grades, accountability systems, or teacher bonuses. Senate Bill 522, this bill was discussed yesterday. This is the bill that speaks to low-performing schools, and this bill has been assigned to a conference committee. Senate members have actually been appointed to the conference committee. The House, as of yesterday, they are moving forward with appointing the conference committee members, but that has not yet been done. The bill contains legislation that would implement the, I'll call it the stoplight approach for the low-performing schools prior to actually going into becoming an ISD school. It's also important to note that the bill would change the definition of a qualifying school. By changing the definition of the qualifying school, if that bill becomes law, that could change what the list looks like that was presented yesterday in terms of the qualifying schools. The definition would now read, the qualifying school would say that it's to include schools, that's a Title I school in the lowest performing 5% of school performance grades of all Title I schools. For the purposes of this subdivision of the bill, a Title I school is a school that's governed by a local board of education and receives funds under Part A of Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Act of 1965. If the bill becomes law, as a reminder, the bill would require the state board to select the lowest scoring qualifying school in the state identified based on the school performance score calculated from the data from 2018-19. It would require one school be added each year from starting in 2021, then 2022, and then 2023. So that's if the bill passes in its current form. The stoplight approach would be implemented as well, but those schools would have to be added one beginning next year. So are there any questions? I know that this is a really big one for the board. I'll hit pause on that one and ask if there are any questions on that specific bill before I move to a couple of others.
The question is there any expectation that we move forward with this year while the bill is still in its pending state? That's sort of the
There is.
$64,000 question we all have.
There
Yeah.
is. And the General Assembly is well aware of the required action of the board pending any new legislation. I think that everyone has a desire to try to get this bill across the finish line, and hopefully with a couple of additional tweaks in the legislation. But in the meantime, the board is required to continue forward with the existing legislation. As Mr. Ellery mentioned yesterday, if we don't get a new bill, we're required to select 4 new schools as compared to 1 new school starting next year.
Excited about the presentation that Dr. Ellerby did yesterday on the Innovative School District, and certainly feel the momentum behind that. Does this legislation have any contingency that the Innovative School District in its current form with the current school it's working at meet or exceed growth expectations before new schools are added to the Innovative School District?
There is nothing in the current legislation or in this bill that would require that. Okay, with that, there's 2 other bills that the board is interested in, so I'll give a quick update as to where they are. Senate Bill 5, which is the school omnibus safety bill, that's been re-referred to the Senate Education Committee, and we have met with the bill sponsor, and key stakeholders have, including myself on behalf of the state board, DPI, as well as some other advocacy groups, in trying to make modifications to the bill that would try to find the perfect balance in terms of what are the requirements of the bill and also what would be imposed on districts, but that would also help to try to continue to drive improvements in school safety. So that bill is still out there. I don't know where it will land, but right now there's still some conversations around it. Senate Bill 476 is the competency-based assessment and mental health teen violence bill. That passed the House, but the Senate did not concur. There has been no further action since then. There's no conference committee report out on that, or it has not even been assigned to a conference committee. So I don't know where that bill will land if it has any further action this session. With that, I will conclude my remarks and just say that before we know it, the short session will be here. So I will begin working with trying to figure out next steps for putting together our legislative agenda for the short session. And of course, a lot of those pieces may be contingent upon what we end up with finally in the budget. But I'll be working behind the scenes on that as well.
Any additional questions, Mr. Buxton?
One question, and it's on kind of the crosswalk between 2 bills, 621 and I believe it's 107. So we now have accountability for our EPPs, and one of the mechanisms is growth.
Correct.
But we're going to have 20 final exams where we no longer have any growth data. And I'm just wondering what the intent is in terms of having growth data for most of our high school teachers and how that affects. I'm not asking you to, but anything that was in that legislation about how we're supposed to, there's something in there, I believe, about how we're supposed to look at growth data.
That is correct. I can refer to it in just a second, but if I recall correctly, basically it would ask that we bring back how we are going to address that. So I think it may have tasked the agency, but I need to go back and see who that was on.
So again, it's how we're going to get growth data for teachers with no data for students.
Correct.
Other questions? Thank you, Ms. Holden.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We'll now proceed directly to our committee reports, and I remind committee chairs in the audience that all voting on consent and any item requiring action will be done at the end of the agenda via roll call. I'll now recognize Ms. White to begin her report for the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee. Ms. White.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy White, and Ms. Jill Kamnitz and I share the responsibility of leading the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee. We have 3 items that we need to tackle today. Action on first read is EICS 1, the restart application for resubmission for Hertford County Schools. We had an update on that yesterday. Does any board member have a question about that request for resubmission? Hearing none, We'll move on to EICS 2, which is an action item. This is S.E. May Kaiser Fox's request to terminate its EMO relationship. We again had some information that was provided yesterday stating that the Office of Charter Schools is confident that the existing board can maintain the management of the school without that EMO in place. Does any board member have a question about this particular request? Hearing none. The third is the just a update that yesterday Dr. James Ellerby gave us a powerful update on the Innovative School District. Many of the positive changes that were have been put in place. There's new leadership with AAC, the partnership organization that's managing that school, new principal in place, lots of wonderful news coming out of that community about community support. They had strong support for an open house that they had. So we were very pleased to receive that report from him yesterday. Mr. Chair, at the time for us to take the vote, I will be moving approval for EICS 1 and EICS 2, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Ms. White. I'll now recognize Mr. Buxton, Chair of the Student Learning and Achievement Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm joined on the SLA committee with Dr. Oxendine, who joins us over the phone. And Dr. Oxendine, we wish you an uneventful afternoon and Friday in Robeson County, and hope you and your neighbors are safe over the next 2 days.
Thank you very much.
We had a number of agenda items for action. We had 3 actions on first reading. Let me cover those first. First, SLA 1, our accountability and school performance grades for 2018-19. That covered our state reporting, our federal reporting, as well as the ISD information. We also had our cohort graduation rate for 2018-19 reports. And finally, Read to Achieve local alternative assessments, which is our annual list that we approve for use by the districts. So let me pause and see if there are any other questions about those 3 items. Hearing none, we have a couple items for, 3 items for action, including 2 consent. Let me just say a word. The 2 consent, SLA 6 and 7, deal with high school accreditation approval recommendations for both Polk County High School and Polk County Early College. There's a template and a process for this that they can request from the State Board of Education for accreditation. These consent items would, your vote would be a vote of approval for both Polk County High and Polk County Early College, and those are in the consent item agenda. We had one other item, policies governing services for children with disabilities, concerning autism spectrum disorder. This has been with us for a number of months. I think we had a very good conversation yesterday, reporting on the outcome of a stakeholder meeting that was held by the department. 35 stakeholders invited. We had 9 participate. A number of revisions to this policy presented yesterday to us that we talked through. We'll be voting on that policy and those revisions today to put in place. The plan right now is an implementation by January of 2020. We had a number of very good questions, I think, about how we're going to stage this implementation. The department has indicated they'd like to come back to us later in the fall and talk through their final plans for implementation, which they'll be working forward, but it's a statewide implementation at this point for January of 2020. Any questions remaining about the autism spectrum disorder policy or the consent item? Seeing none, we had a discussion about the alternative schools accountability model option. That's for 2019-20. We'll come back next month. You have all the schools that are requesting that option. Before I get to our last requested update on K3, I do want to make one comment that is not part of our voting today regarding accountability and school performance. Mr. Chairman, and I think we've all received some requests from school districts to look at the manner with which we treat retests in not just our achievement calculations, but our growth calculations. And while my understanding is it's a little late to do that for this year, we have a study that's been mandated from the legislature to look at school accountability, performance grades, the role of achievement and growth in those grades. And without objection, I'd suggest we roll this question of restart tests in growth and achievement into that look at our accountability system and our recommendations that go back to the General Assembly.
That seems appropriate. Any comments or questions on that proposal? Mr. Ford?
Just like to offer my agreement with that, and I appreciate the reasoning offered. As we continue, especially in 2020, to comport all of our activity around notions of equity, I think that that's implicated in that study.
Yes, and just ditto that from every principal that I know. Yeah, thank you for that consideration.
So without objection, so ordered. We'll handle it in that manner. Thank you, Mr.
We just
Buxton.
got 2,600 references.
You're going to be popular on Twitter today.
It's not me. Finally, we had a requested update on our K-3 framework for action. At your table and on e-board for folks listening at home is a summary of what we talked through yesterday. So you remember Dr. Galloway presented all of the actions that the department intended to take and a proposed timeline. What this summarizes is what we talked through at the end of that presentation. It looks at actions that would come before us specifically, and that the timeline for doing that. And so there are the 9 elements, and again, basically one action in a couple places, 2, and I just wanted to make sure we could kind of follow along at home with a scorecard of what our timeline looks like for action on this top priority for us. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. And I'd add to your report that our framework for action, since it asks for a series of recommendations to improve the focus on reading instruction in teacher preparation programs, to support the development of those recommendations and ensure we have the participation of our partners in this important work, the State Board will form a literacy instruction and teacher preparation task force. This task force will support the work of the Educator Standards and Practice Committee chaired by Dr. Oxendine, and will include representatives from the Department of Public Instruction, UNC System, North Carolina Community College System, North Carolina Independent Colleges and Universities, the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission, NC Center for Advancement of Teaching and Educators in our public schools. The task force will make recommendations which, as appropriate, will be reviewed by Pepsi and ultimately report back to the State Board of Education by March 2020 with approval in July 2020. We anticipate completing the selection of members for this committee by our October meeting later this year. So, thank you, Mr. Buxton. I'll now recognize Ms. Jill Kamitz, the Vice Chair of the Digital Learning and Computer Sciences Committee, for that report. Ms. Kamitz.
In the absence of Lieutenant Governor Forrest, who heads up this effort, I'd like to just do a quick report on what we heard yesterday. Each quarter, we receive an update related to the recipients of the North Carolina Digital Age Learning Initiative grants. Yesterday, we heard particularly from Edenton, Chowan, and Perquimans County, who were recipients of, each were recipients of one of these grants, but they are basically working together in concert across district lines to provide the kind of experiences and in this digital age for that the teachers particularly and that teachers can learn and students can benefit from. We heard about the flexibility that they've used to combine resources to maximize impact across their district lines, and how they're focusing on using instruction to drive technology to truly influence personalized learning in their 2 counties. So it was a really good work that they're doing up in those 2 counties in the Northeast, and we were happy to hear that that kind of effort was going on in that region.
Thank you, Ms. Kamitz. I'll now recognize Vice Chair Duncan, the Chair of the Business Operations Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Along with Todd Chastain, we have this report from the Biz Op Committee from yesterday's meeting. First, we had an action on first reading. Chris Vecchione made a report on the need to make a revision to SBE Policy Amendment A-Lot 003, which is on the Comprehensive Support and Improvement Allotment Revision, which is a move to be a more equitable distribution of the funds that are available after study by the department. I don't know if there were not any questions about that yesterday, and if anyone has one, obviously we can entertain it. That will be an action item shortly. BizOp 2, the second item, we did have a very good discussion with, and is an item that involves a report to the General Assembly for school start and end dates. One of the things this illustrated, I think, is first of all, a need to thank our staff, which had a very short timeline from the passing of this legislation to gather a great deal of information, which they did during a very busy time of year for them as well, which they did, and we give thanks for that. In addition to that, they did it early so as to get the report out in time so that all the superintendents could see it and others. And so we got a lot of feedback, which was very beneficial. We had a very worthwhile discussion yesterday as a result of the board having an opportunity to have a good look at it. After yesterday's meeting, with the agreement of the board that we should make some revisions to subsection C, which is the findings section, we sought to encapsulate the comments made by board members to provide a report that is actually more informative, if you will, to the General Assembly in terms of providing additional information as to not just providing the table for the start dates, but some explanation for some of the start dates and the information that we received back from the field, which was substantial. And so I want to make sure everyone's had a chance to read the newly revised subsection C and make sure that we accurately captured the sense of the board and the board's discussion, and would open the floor for a moment if there's any comments that anyone wants to make about that or any need to make further revisions. All right, not hearing anything, not wanting to cut anybody off, but not hearing anything, we will keep going. And that's, as revised, this report will now be offered for an action item, our BizOp 2 item, this morning's vote. And again, our thanks to Alexis Schaus and her staff for the very fine work done on putting this together. We had an update on contracts report, and we also had the requested update provided from the BizOp committee on the monthly agency vacancy report, and thank Melissa Werner for providing that report to us. And as we continue to revise the format, that department, which has been very busy, also has been flexible in revising the format to try to get the information that is most helpful to the board, and we're appreciative of that. Finally, we had two consent items, both required reports to the legislature. One is the State Board of Education annual report on waivers of state laws or rules granted to local education agencies focusing on class size and or start dates for school calendars. And finally, BizOp 4, which is the last consent item, is a report to the General Assembly, again, an annual report required with respect to the state agency mobile device usage. And not unless there are any questions or further comments, that would conclude the report of the BizOp committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. I now call on Dr. Oxendine, the Chair of the Educator Standards and Practice Committee, for the final committee report for the day. Dr. Oxendine?
Thank you, Chairman Davis. This is Olivia Oxendine, remotely from my home here in Lumberton. And I chair this committee. Alongside me in that responsibility is Ms. Amy White, and I want to thank Ms. White for being alongside me remotely this morning, and she's going to join me in presenting some of these items. The first item is an issue session, and I am so sorry that I cannot be there in person to meet Ms. Kate Walsh. One of these days we'll have fair weather in Robinson County. We do occasionally, but we will always have it in September, I'm hoping. And someday I'll have an opportunity to meet you in person. But making that introduction is going to be Ms. White. And so, Ms. White, I will turn that over to you.
Colleagues, we're going to beg for your patience. Ms. Walsh is landing at RDU, and we'll need to make the quick journey from the airport over to the board meeting. And so if we can put you on pause for her presentation, we're really excited about her sharing with us about the EPP and the dashboard and We'll just wait a few minutes until she can get here. So Dr. Oxendine, I'm going to turn it back over to you to walk us through those other items. Dr. Oxendine will actually lead, and I'll look for comments and recognize you if you have anything that you'd like to say. So we're tag teaming.
Okay, so we're going to, I'm not hearing very clearly, we're going to the second item on the agenda, is that correct, Amy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, very good. Item 2, or the second item, the emergency action on first reading, ESP 1, emergency rules for the House Bill 107, and that pertains to policies around TCED-008 and the same abbreviation, 013. And this is actually it's action on first reading, but this will be taken up we're going to act on it next week, or sometime in the next few days, via a phone call. And this is growing out of the legislation 107, and it is required a bunch of the work will be done by our partner, Pepsi, and recommendations will be coming forward to us. And it is all about developing emergency rules for this particular piece of legislation. And the rules will be around performance measures, which is pertaining to our EQP, the annual performance report, and accountability statuses. So again, this is some critical deadlines that we need to pay attention to. The report needs to go forward to the General Assembly on or before October 1, and the information, all of this will be made public on or before December 15th. So action is coming forward on that in the next few days. The next item is under action at ESMP 2, the national preparation accreditation, more specifically the discussion yesterday focused on AQUEP. This is an accreditor that many of our ECPs in North Carolina are extremely interested in partnering with AQUEP. And we had a lively discussion yesterday on ins and outs of AQUEP and what it means in terms of quality in our EPPs, what it means in terms of quality in terms of producing the best qualified teachers and other educators. We had good information presented by Dr. Coogan. We also had some information brought forward by Dr. Tomberlin. What I am recommending is that, even though this item is listed under action, what I am recommending, board members, is that we table this item for 1 month, that we devote a bit more time into research and further discussions and clarifications, basically based on some of the issues, not necessarily concerns, but issues and questions raised yesterday. I would also like to extend an invitation to AQUEP to perhaps, if this works within their schedule, to perhaps come in person and meet us and have an opportunity to exchange in conversation with AQUEP. So board members again and Chairman Davis, I would like to, even though it states action, I would like to table that item for 1 month and return to it in October. The next item is a discussion item, ESMP 3, the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission Annual Report, and that was presented to us by Dr. Tim Evans, and this is pursuant to General Statute 115C-268. So therein is the requirement that Pepsi produce an annual report, and that has been done, and we will act on it next month. I think there are 2 critical dates due in, I believe, in I'm not sure, September 2019 right away. And the report covers the period, covers the period from September 2018 to September 2019. And the last item, item number 4, is also a discussion item. material around the requirement that our teachers during the first 3 years do participate in the Beginning Teacher Support Program. So that concludes all items under ES&P, Chairman Davis, unless we have questions from my colleagues.
Doesn't look like we have any. So just to confirm, Dr. Oxendine, both ES&P 1 and ES&P 2 will be removed from our action voting, and we'll pick those up in a future meeting. Okay. So while we await the arrival of our guest speaker, we'll proceed on with voting on the matters that are before us today. Before we proceed to voting, there is an item for consideration in my chairman's report, and that is there are vacancies on the Whole Child North Carolina Interagency Council. An appointment for consideration is that of a former or current Teacher of the Year for a 2-year term per state board policy. And I recommend that we appoint Mr. Freebird McKinney for that 2-year term. Resume and policy reference materials are included for your consideration in this consent item. Any questions on that particular recommendation?
Having real reservations.
See that resume.
He's a terrible speaker.
And I just want to say thank you for consideration in this, and I felt not only as a representative for the State Teacher of the Year, but also as an advisor to the school board. I'm really hoping to promote the strategic plan and our initiatives to close opportunity gaps, to improve academic performance and improve teacher preparedness. And I think being able to synthesize what the strategic plan is doing with the interagency committee could really move that forward. So I really appreciate this consideration. Thank you.
Chairman, since Mr. McKinney is taking this seriously, I will too. I really appreciate the degree to which, after 2 years of service to the state, you continue to offer yourself up and you continue to try to do what is best on behalf of our kids and our teachers and our educators. So I thank you for being available to do this.
Thank you. It's an honor. It's in me.
Very good. So thank you. Board members will now vote on any item requiring action from your committee reports. A thorough discussion and report was provided on each of these items, including consent items. Any item on the consent agenda is primarily not complex and may have come to the board for discussion in a prior month. I note also that board members have seen these consent agenda items for at least a week. So at this time, I ask if there's a request to remove any item from consent action or action on first reading items. If there is no request to remove any item, I ask for a motion to approve the following: the August 7 through 8, 2019 meeting minutes, EICS 1 and 2, SLA 1 through 4 and 6 through 7, BizOp 1 through 4, and the Whole Child North Carolina appointment for Mr. Freebird McKinney. Is there a motion? Motion by Mr. Ford. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Buxton. Any questions on these items we're about to vote on? Seeing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you. So while we wait the arrival of our guest speaker, which is the last item on our agenda, we'll go on break. And so just be aware that when she gets here, we'll call this meeting back into session. All right, we're on break.
We have to approve the minutes separately, or did you say that as part of the vote?
The August 7th.
Morning. Hi.
Okay, we are back in session, and to begin our final agenda item of the day, I'll turn to Miss Amy White. Just want to make sure, Dr. Oxendine, that you have rejoined us.
Yes, I'm here, waiting eagerly in Ms. Walsh, and just to say hi to her, and so sorry that I can't see you in person. I know that we will have an opportunity in the future to meet.
Ms. White?
I'm looking at the title slide on Ms. Walton's PowerPoint, and it says leaky teacher pipeline, and in Oak Island, North Carolina, there's an ice cream place that used to exist called the Leaky Tiki. Fantastic ice cream, but so now I'm thinking of Leaky Teachy. We are so pleased to have you here for our issue session today. We issue you a warm welcome to colleagues at the board table, and those who are listening in. Let me introduce this stellar speaker to you all. She is Kate Walsh, and she's the president of the National Council on Teacher Quality since 2003, and if you'd like to do the math, that is 16 years of professional leadership. She's been leading work to ensure that every child has equal access to effective teachers. Board members, you know that this has been a topic of conversation for us in how we can provide for the best education possible for all students in the state of North Carolina. At NCTQ, Walsh has spearheaded efforts to instill greater transparency, higher standards among those institutions that exert influence and authority over our teachers. Now, notably, she launched the first ever review and rankings of the nation's teacher prep programs, and previously, Walsh worked at the Able Foundation in Baltimore, the Baltimore City Public Schools, and the Core Knowledge Foundation, and I thought this was really cool. Among her accomplishments, she started and ran a boarding school located in Kenya, East Africa, in order to educate at-risk boys from Baltimore. She founded one of the nation's premier STEM programs. She's yielded numerous Intel Talent Search winners for the Baltimore City and started the first alternative certification program for teachers in Maryland. And might I add that she has served on the Maryland State School Board. So we are thankful and excited about hearing what you have to share with us today about addressing our leaky teaching problem.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, and I actually appreciate you moving me up on the calendar because I'm afraid I'm not going to get out of here this evening, and I didn't bring a change of clothes, so otherwise I'd be happy to stay in North Carolina. Let me begin by saying this. This work is so hard. It is really hard. I've sat in your position. I've sat as a program officer for our foundation where we were able to give money away to get people to do things differently. I have sat at the national level. I've sat in a city school office. I've sat in a lot of seats over my long career, and I've never had a conclusion that anything was easy. So some of the things I'd like to talk to you today about, they're not that hard, but politics often makes things hard. So I look to you to keep me grounded in what I say, and I also hope that you'll feel comfortable.
Has joined the conference.
I also hope you'll feel comfortable just having this as a conversation, because I think that makes it much more useful to you. I have no problem with people interrupting me unless you interrupt me about 10 times, and then I'm like, okay, that's enough. So please, let's make this a discussion. I just want to say this: that this work is really hard, and I have some conclusions as I sort of at the waning years of my professional career. And that is, one, do not ever forget the power of the research behind teacher quality. I am positive that you are not an exception to any other school board in the country who's been asked to sort of shift your focus away from teacher quality and onto other issues, which sound very important. I don't mean to disparage other issues, but I will say this. None of them has the research behind them that teacher quality does. So if you're looking for bang for the buck, I would urge you to keep yourselves focused on teacher quality. Nothing else will provide a payout to that extent. And to that end, North Carolina has done some really great things. I mean, you all are to be commended. I don't know if it's this school board or a previous school board or legislatures, but you've done some really good things and some things that other states have found almost impossible to do, like reducing the importance of master's degrees. We all think having teachers get more education is a wonderful idea, but the way the system works, you try to get the fastest, cheapest degree to earn a higher salary. And what has resulted from that kind of perverse system is that the degrees aren't adding value in the classroom. And so districts are spending so much money all across the United States trying to persuade teachers to get master's degrees. And it doesn't matter what they get it in, whether it's relevant to their subject matter. And the research, I'm sorry, the research is absolutely conclusive on this front, but you and Florida are the only states that have sort of said, we know this is hard, we know there's a powerful higher education lobby that's working against any changes here, but you guys stood up and did that, and that's so commendable. And you've also made this a state really good for teachers from out of state. You cannot believe how hard it is to move from out of state into a state and get a teaching job without starting all over. I think the only good things I ever did on the Maryland State School Board was to help people who would call me and say, I can't get through the red tape. I'm moving from out of state. I can't get anyone in the state office to answer my questions. Can you help me get a teaching job in this state? And you guys have made it much more sensible. You have a much more sensible approach to getting teachers from out of state. And you also have recognized the importance of additional pay. Pay is crucial. And I know you're up against a real challenge in this state with pay. Well, across the country, teachers earn about 22% less than comparable professions. We've just not kept up. This wasn't true 15, 20, 25 years ago. Teaching was about comparable with other professions. But we lost a lot of ground in the last decade and a half. And I know you guys have tried to address some things with rewarding teachers who want to work in tough schools. So that's really great. I know it's not enough. You know it's not enough. But it is definitely a start. So in that context of how hard this work is and how you guys have done some courageous things, I'd like to show you what are the two levers, I think, which can help you improve teacher quality. There are lots of different things you can do, and I think in the last decade we were sort of a little bit off focus with a relentless focus on evaluation. I'm a strong believer in good evaluation systems, but I think we did a little bit of putting the cart before the horse. So I think there are two things a school board needs to be aware of to improve teacher quality. And the first of them is teacher preparation. We need to do a much better job preparing teachers in the United States. And you have some exemplary people in this state that can light the way, like Ellen McIntyre, Dean. So I think there's a lot you can do on that front. And the second is teacher pay. And you have done some things, but I think that without state legislatures stepping up and changing base revenue, that's going to be a bit more frustrating. So I'm going to focus mostly on program approval, if that's okay. Okay. You happen to be a really lucky state in that the state board does have authority for the programs that you approve. In many states, it's left entirely to the state school chief. So I sat in a state in Maryland where the school chief would approve all the programs, and the state board never heard about it. So we never had an opportunity to review any evidence before us. And then there are other states which have transferred that power to professional state boards, professional boards. And so you guys have a real opportunity, you and about 22 other states, to really make an impact on program approval. So why is this so important? Basically, we have a lot of evidence that teacher preparation needs a lot of work. And that doesn't mean that there aren't some great people in this. They have just as tough a job as you and I do behind a table. This is really hard work. But there's a lot of things going on within teacher preparation which are not helpful to people who want to teach, and they're certainly not helpful to the kids they're going to one day teach in the classroom. So foremost among them is reading. We know how to teach kids how to read. That is as conclusive a finding as there is in all of education research. Right now in this country, we are successful with between 30 and 40% of kids. We're only successful with about 60% of all kids. But we know how to teach all but about 5%. We could get that number down to about 5%. But we are not arming teachers, and we're not insisting on curriculum that respect that research. But the number one problem is this stuff is not being taught in schools of ed. It's rejected philosophically. Some professors who are teaching reading just don't even know the research. This is job one for this state. Nothing is more important than a child learning how to read. And for any of you who have followed this issue, it's been 2 decades now where we have allowed people to teach things which in any other field would be called malpractice, because they're not respecting the science. We also have a lot of evidence that teachers are not getting enough. Teachers who are heading to the elementary classroom are not getting what they need in mathematics. And we wonder why, when we look at international tests, why America is always at the middle and dropping. Because all those foundational math skills are not attended to. And if you're not learning how to multiply and subtract and divide fractions in elementary grades, you're not going to be prepared for algebra or any high school math. So the foundational mathematics that all teachers need is not being delivered. This does not just fall to teacher prep, this falls to your institutions at large, because it's the math departments that often are a little bit cavalier to teachers. The more serious math professors are like, well, I don't want to teach the teachers. They don't like math. It's so important. If you look at other countries and what they're doing to prepare their elementary teachers in mathematics, this isn't rocket science. Don't let anyone come in here and testify that it's too hard for elementary teachers to be prepared in mathematics. It isn't. They need 3 courses. They need 3 solid courses that help them get ready for the classroom. And we find only 13% of the programs in this state are currently doing that. Any questions? Okay, and then this next point I want to make. We're looking to see whether future elementary teachers are getting just basic history, science, language arts, literature, English literature. There's very little attention. This is not the teacher prep program. This is the institutions at large, which are not making sure that teachers are getting the general science and general history that they need to teach elementary grades. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, you get that in high school. Get that in grade school. You don't even need to do it in college. In college, it's time for electives, right? a lot of the kids who are going into teaching right now have a very weak grasp of those subjects. And that doesn't spill over into just, it spills over from teaching science to how well kids do on the state test. Because the more topics a teacher is comfortably teaching, the better kids will understand what they read. And so this isn't just a matter of they don't know enough science. It's a matter of we're not preparing kids who understand what they read. So this is kind of a bleak picture, right? This is very similar to what we see around the nation. This is not something, I'm sorry, those are your scores. But what I've just covered is what is going on around the nation. So any time you think I'm being overly critical of North Carolina, I could give this same talk in 49 other states. This is a national problem. So please do not take me as coming in, this national person coming in and telling North Carolina what to do. We've all got our work cut out for us, okay? All right, so one of the things, and all this is going to reach to a point here, a recommendation for you. If you look at education majors, look how easy it is to get an A in education. So this is a study done by Corey Cadell, who's a professor, an economics professor in Missouri. And he went and looked at about 30 institutions in the Midwest. And he got all their grading information. And he looked at what was the average grade for all the other majors on a campus compared to education. And this is what I'm showing you is a pattern he found repeatedly, that it's all too easy to get an A in education. Why would that be? Because teaching is one of the hardest jobs there is. Have any of you ever taught? Usually when people say it's the hardest job you ever had, and yet we're taking teacher candidates and we're saying this is a piece of cake. You're twice as likely to graduate with honors if you're an education major than any other major on campus. Okay, so what can a school board do about some of these problems? The first thing is to make program approval the process more meaningful, and that means bringing in some objective data. Now, I understand you all are about to hear some changes in your program approval process, and I'm going to put a little asterisk of concern with you, because this makes sense, what you are veering towards, front end. You're looking at outcomes. You don't want to look at too much at inputs. But you know what? Those inputs matter. And if you go to a campus and you find that no one is getting any science, that can explain why those candidates are all failing their science test. So you can look at the pass rates on those tests, and you can say, your conclusion can be, well, the tests are irrelevant, the tests are too hard, the tests are biased, the tests have all these problems, let's throw out the test. But only when you dig in and see that those programs have done absolutely nothing, those institutions have done absolutely nothing to make sure that those candidates are prepared for their test, then you have a different conclusion, right? It's a different mindset. So as you look at whether you should abandon some of the inputs, I would urge you not to, because they tell you a lot about what's going on. It's very hard to get just output measures. It's almost impossible to do that using value-added measures. We've even tried in this state to do just that. And it's very hard to link a program to their future teachers' effectiveness. So that's not easy work. You won't be able to do it for all your institutions. The idea that you can somehow correlate what a program does with the outputs of teachers in the classroom, it's not possible. It's only possible for your biggest institutions that are sending teachers to multiple school districts. So I can tell you technically it's not a good idea. And if you're only going to look at evaluation data, well, most teachers are all getting really great evaluations. So what are you learning? So I would just urge you that though it makes a lot of sense to say, let's just look at the outputs. Let's see what they let's see what they can do. I'm promising you that the data that you're going to get is not going to be as meaningful as you might like. Okay? The second thing I would urge you as a board to do is to verify that your licensing tests are doing what you want them to do. There's a lot of push right now in the United States, in states across the country. They're saying the tests are a barrier to teaching. The tests are keeping qualified minorities out of the classroom. Make sure that you know what's on your tests so that you can stand up and say, these tests are standing for something that matters. They are making sure the teachers know how to teach reading before they get in the classroom. If you look at those tests and find that the content on them is largely irrelevant to the job of teaching, if you look on and it looks like a game of Trivial Pursuit, then maybe you should go back to, who's your testing publisher? Pearson or ETS? I don't know. It's Pearson or ETS State. But you go back to your testing publisher and say, this isn't measuring what we think is important. But the idea that you would consider throwing out tests would make North Carolina, and if this happens across the country, teaching, the United States would be the only country in the world that's developed that doesn't have any milestones someone has to reach to be a teacher. What kind of message does that send to future teachers? We're saying this is the easiest major on campus. You're likely to graduate with all A's. You don't have to go through any hurdles to get there. We're not even going to make sure you know what we think is important. What do you think that does to the profession? It really undermines it. It seriously undermines it. So rather than, I'm not here to defend the tests, I'm here to say to you, it is your job to make sure that the tests that you have put in place are doing what you want to do. Not to throw them out, but to make sure they're as good as you want them to be. Okay? Now, the last one is really probably the most critical thing, and probably the most politically difficult thing for you to do. You need to start publishing actual pass rates for your licensing tests. And you probably think you already do, and you don't. And let me explain. So, let me tell you a little story. Back in 1998, George Miller, who was the head of the House Education Subcommittee, said, it matters how well programs prepare their teachers. Because you as a future consumer, you as a future teacher, have the right and the right to know whether a program is going to successfully make you a teacher. Makes sense, right? Well, he had everything thrown at him that could be thrown at him. But he did get it passed into law that states had to report their pass rate data for each program. But when that law got interpreted for regulation in the regulatory process, it said you only have to report program completers, which is what North Carolina is currently doing. So what is a program completer? It's anyone who passed the test. So to wrap your head around that for a second. So programs will report to you that they have 96, 97% of their kids passing, when in fact, maybe half of them didn't pass the test. That's because they only have to report people who finished the program, so they can report a very high pass rate. This is not just misleading to state boards, which are approving programs. It is misleading to future teachers, because I, as a future teacher, don't know where to shop. And no one is telling me that if I pick school A, I'll have an 80% chance of becoming a teacher. And if I pick school B, I only have a 40% chance. a huge, huge difference. Now, let me explain. The reason this issue is so politically fraught is because of disproportionately poor performance by minorities on these tests. So institutions which accept a lot of minority candidates will naturally want to come in here and give you an earful about how any proposal to publish pass rates is in fact undermining the importance of putting a diverse teacher force in the classroom. And I would say to you that you can do this well, and our organization plans on doing it. And so you do not compare an institution which is accepting nothing but first-generation college goers with Chapel Hill. What you do is you say, I'm going to compare an institution that accepts first-generation college goers with another institution that's like it. Which one is doing a better job getting their kids ready for those licensing tests? And more importantly than the tests, which one's doing a better job for giving the content you need to pass to be in the classroom? This can be done fairly and it can be done sensitively, but this information should definitely be made public. And right now, states and programs are indeed complicit, making sure that this data does not see the public eye. And I don't understand how we can justify that. There are programs that will say, well, we don't want our pass rate data shown because it doesn't tell the full story about who we are. Now think about that. These are programs who take tuition dollars and they take 2 or 3 years of someone's time and they say, it is not our obligation to make sure you're successful on the state tests. That is not found in other professions. If you look at nursing, the first-time pass rate for nursing is 85%. The first-time pass rate for teaching on the most popular tests in the country that's found in 23 states at the elementary level is 46%. But nobody cares. Nobody knows. Nobody knows what programs are doing a good job. Nobody has an idea. Sir.
So thanks so much for being here. I got a chance to see you speak about 3 years ago at the ECS conference in Denver, and so I'm glad to be able to talk with you again. So you mentioned, and I don't feel one way or the other about publishing pass rates, but I do have some reservations when you mentioned that institutions who are typically minority-serving institutions would have reservations. But then you talked about comparing first-generation students to schools that don't serve first-generation college goers. And I guess I feel like there might be a conflation between, say, students of color and first-generation students, right? Between economic disadvantage and race, and those are two different variables, right? So if we're specifically talking about students of color who may be second or third-generation college goers, right, but may still struggle with these tests, isn't the issue the testing instrument, who it's normed for? Might there be some cultural nuances there? How do you control for that? To me, I think one of the concerns is the instrument itself, right? Does it measure what we're intending to measure? Does it, in fact, embody some sort of cultural biases? And what recommendations would you have if that's the case, if it's the testing instrument? Because, I mean, when you compare that to nursing, my question is the same. What's the testing instrument, right?
Nursing does not have the disproportionate impact on underserved populations. But let me say this, that is everyone's concern right now, is that the tests are culturally biased. If you looked at what the process is for putting these tests out into the public domain, the amount of anti-bias measures that are applied to those tests, because they have to be defensible in a court of law, is extensive. So I think there is an assumption, and I make assumptions as well, but very few people are accusing the tests of being culturally biased, have actually reviewed the tests to assess whether they are in fact culturally biased. So that's why I was saying to you in that second point up there is make sure your tests, look at the tests. Make sure you're looking at them and saying, this is the knowledge and skills we want our teachers to have. Now, let me get at another point about this is, there will be knowledge and skills that will not seem to be culturally biased, but which minorities may have a harder time on. Even though it's a, and even you could say there's nothing biased about it. This is why I do what I do. This is why you do what you do. I'm positive. This system of education in the United States there are two systems. There's one for middle class kids, and there's one for kids who are poor, and there's one for kids who are historically the victims of prejudice. And why would we expect kids coming out of that inferior K-12 system to be able to do well on a test, as kids who have had that middle class system? So I think it's essential for us to appreciate that tests are not the evil. They should not be the focus of our disdain. I say that tests in general should not be the focus of disdain. I do not know about your test, okay? But they are simply the messenger, and they're telling us what we already knew anyway, that we're not doing a very good job educating black and brown kids in this country. And we need not only K-12 to address this issue, but we need programs when they accept kids of color who may not have had a strong K-12 education. They need to accept that their obligation is to make sure those kids get courses which will, and I'm not talking about remedial courses. I'm simply saying this is what's going on now. They will have a history, they have to pick a history that they need to take. And the kids will look around, they'll get a list of 20 courses. Do you remember doing this in college? And they go, which one do I want to take? And they'll get a choice between taking a course in the sexual revolution in the 1960s and the American Revolution in 1760s. Which one do you think they're going to pick? There's nobody standing before them saying, you know what, you don't know anything about the American Revolution. It's fine if you want to take a course in the sexual revolution, but you've got to attend to what you need to be a teacher. And that's what I'm talking about. When you pay less attention to some of these inputs, we're missing some of the fundamental reasons why our kids are not doing well on these tests. So we've sort of taken, okay, the test must be biased. The test must be, there's nothing else going on here. When I can provide you with conclusive evidence for every program in your state. There's not a single program in your state which makes sure that the kids in those programs get this kind of content knowledge. It's no wonder they're failing. They're not getting in K-12 and they're not getting in college.
So, could I ask a follow-up? Is that okay? So I guess, and this may be probably a larger discussion that goes beyond testing, right? So in the instance where you have an institution that has a high test passer rating, right? Mm-hmm. I always wonder if it's not a matter of, and I think that you're right, that a system that in the K-12 perpetually fails students of color and students of poverty, not to be conflated with with each other. That the end product will be sometimes students who are already behind the 8 ball when it comes to passing these tests. But I do wonder for students of color who do pursue education, if there aren't funds of knowledge that will aid them in the classroom that are perhaps not being measured, and vice versa. So take, for instance, somebody who passes this test at an institution with a high passer rating. That's, to me, no indication that they can go into a classroom with kids in color and be effective. So is there a competency that's being missed, right, by the exam? And that's what I mean. Not just are the questions culturally biased, but are we not measuring some of the funds of knowledge that kids of color do bring to these fields that may be effective in the classroom? So that's, I have a very love-hate relationship with some of these assessments in terms of what determines the effectiveness of an educator in a classroom in particular contexts.
There is not a single assessment you can give that is going to capture all of the skills and knowledge a teacher needs to bring to the table. So what I was dwelling on in that point, but I could expand it a bit, was that for as long as I've been around anyway, we've always thought teachers need to know their subject matter. It didn't mean they were going to be a good teacher. It just was a necessary but not sufficient measure that we need. So we need to know their subject matter. We need to know, an elementary teacher, we need to know they know how to teach reading. That's a different assessment. It's nothing to do with those other things. Nothing. And then there's cultural competence, which is essential, which people are not that good at measuring yet. But it can be measured in another way. So in student teaching, cultural competence should play a very large role. You know, a lot of programs put student teachers into only white schools or schools where they have a chummy relationship. And so student teachers never have an experience of kids who don't look like them because most teachers are white. And not only should they be put in schools where there are children who don't look like them, they should be put in schools which are doing a great job with those kids. Because you don't want them going into schools and they go, yeah, you know what, those kids really can't learn. So that's hard work. If you as a board said tomorrow to your programs that they have to start putting their teacher candidates into rotation in a school that is successful teaching kids who are underserved, they go ballistic because we have a hard enough time finding any school that would take our student teachers. So it's not easy, but that is how you build cultural competence through experience. How you assess it is less clear. There's the EdTPA. Do you guys use EdTPA? That's probably more likely to have some features of it, but I don't think it's strength. It's more about, can you teach kids? You know, I don't know whether it separates what kinds of kids as well, but I'm not an expert on that at all.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions about that? How are we doing on time?
We're okay.
Okay. So here are some of the things that you ought to consider when you're thinking about program approval and what it looks like. First of all, I think I don't need to go through each one of these things, that's for sure. But I do think that the two big takeaways are that you apply uniform data across the state, something that all programs have to meet. You can't just look at outcomes. You also have to look at some inputs. You can't look at just an institution and assume what happens at the graduate level is the same as what happens at the undergraduate level. I promise you there are different admission standards between the graduate and the undergraduate. All the courses are different. You're much less likely to get good math at the graduate level than you are undergraduate. So there's all sorts of strengths and weaknesses. So you need to make sure you can look at the both. But I think one of the easy takeaways for you guys is we tend to do a thumbs up and a thumbs down with our programs. You know, this gets approved, this didn't get approved. Where's the in between? What are the things that are saying, what you should be as a board to be able to say, here are the 3 programs that earn top marks in this state. They're doing a fantastic job. Here are 10 programs that have ways to go. We approved them, but here we gave them a list of things they need to work on. That level of detail is really important. But I don't know how many programs, do you know how many programs you have to approve a year in this state? It's way more than you can do well. I know in Massachusetts, they have to approve like 2,000 programs. It's crazy because you got to do every little one. I would say you need to prioritize and look at elementary programs. That should be your priority, and treat all that and maybe pre-K. But that's where the real foundations are. Otherwise, you're going to end up spending hours and weeks and months trying to figure out who ought to be approved, who ought to get less than a full approval. And then if you made your program's findings accessible for people to see, you're a public body. What you decide about a program should be public information. We recently asked the state for the 10 most recent program approvals that you did. And we had to do open records, and it was like pulling teeth. This information should be available to the public. This is not a secret. These are not state secrets. Okay. So, as I've said, here's this information about pass rate data, that it's so essential, and it provides you with a basis of conversation with your programs. If you're not doing well, what can you do to do better? This is not gotcha. This is not punitive. This is simply saying these data do matter. This isn't a matter of cultural bias, so we don't think it's, you don't get out the hook for saying these are just biased tests. You've decided they're not. You don't get up the hook for saying it's all about standardized tests, so standardized tests aren't important. These tests are measuring what a teacher needs to know. If you're not going to measure what a teacher needs to know about their subject matter, what are you going to do? How are you going to know that teachers are going into the classroom and are ready to teach the subjects at hand? You got to have a plan to replace those tests, or you've got to make sure the tests are what you want them to be. Okay. Here are some of the reasons states aren't publishing their pass rate data. There's a lot of pressure from IHEs. As I said, there's a lot of talk about, we don't pay any attention to standardized test data. No other profession says that. Do you ever hear a law school say, we don't care if our students pass the bar? Do you ever hear a nursing program say, we don't care if our students pass the boards? This is the only profession we can find where it is okay for programs that have been approved by the state to operate and prepare candidates. This is the only profession we can find where we're told it doesn't matter if our candidates do well on the tests. Okay, so I've put up some of the reasons, and I think we've already touched upon some of those reasons why these data aren't being made public. And I'd love to hear your own thoughts, if you have some ideas about what would prevent this state from moving forward on this. Go ahead, push back. Okay. Okay, so here's what's going on. This is data from the most common elementary content test. The pass rate for minorities, for blacks, is 38%. Did you know that? Did you know it was this bad? But nobody's asking these programs to do anything different. Instead, the poor candidate takes the test and says, what did I do wrong? I've gotten all A's in my classes. Remember, that person has all A's in the classes. Nobody's told that person they don't know what they need to know. Okay? And this isn't just falling on the programs, it's the institution at large. What are we doing to making sure candidates, especially, why aren't we diagnosing these kids when they come into the programs? Why aren't we finding out first that they need more history, they need more science, they need more mathematics, they need really good reading instruction? Why aren't we finding that out ahead of time? Okay, and this is what you're up against in the state. You have 84% of your teachers are white. Only 52% of your students are white. And this is not a matter of, oh gosh, it's nice to have black teachers in the classroom, it's nice to have brown teachers in the classroom. Look at what the data has shown. A diverse teacher workforce matters a lot. So to Mr. Ford's comment that is a state capturing all the competencies that someone might bring to the table, that's a very important question that we need to ask ourselves. But the data from study after study, this is not just one study, this tells us how important it is for black or brown kids to see black or brown teachers. And they don't even have to be in the same classroom. Some of the benefits come from just having black or brown teachers in the school, okay? So that's essential. But when we put a cautionary note in, all this data, all this research was done on teachers who had passed those hurdles. So if you just open up the floodgates and you say, anyone can teach, we don't care, we just care about the color of your skin, if you open up the floodgates, you're not going to get these results. Okay, these are all of this research was done on teachers who had passed through the hurdles to teach. Okay. So just to review, we need programs to better diagnose about knowledge gaps. And we need programs to prescribe and be willing to say to college students, here's what you need to take to do well on our tests and to be ready for the classroom. This isn't just about the tests. I can't emphasize enough. This is about we're measuring what we think matters. And if you're not currently doing so, you need to change it so you do have that confidence. States can do things like pay fees for low-income candidates to take the test. This is a huge issue. Another reason why it's important for state boards to stand up on this. If you've got kids who are going to college, first-generation college goer, and the first thing they do is have to put out $200 for a test, and they fail, they're less likely to want to, they don't have the money to take another $200 and put it on a test. So if there were a support fund for kids who are low income to encourage them to go into teaching, just pay some of these testing fees, you know, the amount of retaking, when only 46% of people are passing this test on their first attempt, those testing companies are making an awful lot of money on retakes. And what the programs will tell you is, well, we're doing all sorts of remediation, you know. They're not looking at their basic courses. They're doing extra, here, go take this remedial class in math or reading. They're not saying, the courses that we give you, that you're going to take as part of your 120 credits, they're going to be geared to the job of teaching. You're not going to go take remedial courses. The courses we are providing are what will meet your needs. So this is not solved by hiring a testing company. This is not solved by giving kids test prep booklets, because that knowledge goes in and out, as we all know. This is only fixed by making the program of study worthwhile. And finally, I think there's some programs that are doing a great job on this front, and your job is to honor them and make sure others know what a great job they're doing. So that's, I can talk about anything else. I did not talk much about teacher compensation, depending on your time, but I think that that's probably more than enough for you to absorb in one morning. Okay. And you're probably all anxious to get away from the hurricane. So I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, what questions do you have? What a thought-provoking presentation you provided. Mr. Chastain.
I had a question. You mentioned earlier, if I didn't mishear what you stated, but you stated that we know how to teach reading. Over the last decade and a half or so, there's been something equivalent to malpractice. And so, can you briefly describe the model? It's the correct reading model, or the one that's effective, and the one that we're committing malpractice in a lot of areas. Just so I have a better understanding of that, because we discuss reading a lot in here. And
I can tell you most of the programs in your state are not teaching scientifically based reading research. They're not. I have conclusive evidence to that fact. And what you're looking for is explicit, systematic instruction in the 5 essential components of reading, beginning with phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Now, that little paraphrase could go on any college course thing you'd see, what we do is we dig in and we look at the lectures, we look at the assignments to make sure kids are learning this stuff. We do not set the bar high. I promise you, our bar is not high. But even with that pretty relatively low bar, they're not getting it. And I think the biggest problem is there are twofold. Is one, there's an ideological resistance to what the research says, even though this research was done on tens of thousands of kids and adults, and I can show you pictures of the brain. They've taken scans of the brain of people who learn how to read and people who don't learn how to read, and what happens to their brains. You can see it in living color that this research is right. It's as conclusive a finding as that smoking causes lung cancer. It is that conclusive. Tens of millions of dollars, tens of thousands on 17 different research sites of the country since 1960. And if I were you, I would insist upon that every reading course that's taught in this state align with what is scientifically based. And there's no shortage of experts who can tell you whether they're successful or not. Because it is that serious. Nothing is more important. Nothing. You know, I read a horrible, horrible quote from the leader of, a teacher educator who's the leader of the sort of the anti-science movement yesterday, saying, I don't care if when a kid reads, that they look and they say it's a pony when the word said horse. Because they get the idea. I don't believe in teaching word recognition. Like, how does that serve anyone well? And will there always be pictures for us to rely upon when we're reading a newspaper or trying to fill out a form? And a pony is not a horse. There are a lot of differences between a pony and a horse. So there is amazing, it is galling to me that this persists. And there are things you can do, and happy to go into more detail, but this is like job one. Make sure teachers are coming out in the state who know what good reading looks like. And I would say job 1.5 is on mathematics. You know, if this school board did nothing else but looked at those two things, you would be ahead of most states in the country.
Sure, I'll defer to James. His hand first.
Sure.
Mr. Ford and then Mr. Buxton.
Okay. So, well, I'll take a point of personal privilege here by saying, one, I want to appreciate you for shouting out my dean, Ellen McIntyre at UNC Charlotte.
She's amazing.
Yeah, she is. She's an amazing leader, and so I appreciate you referencing her. I did have a question, just consulting your professional opinion. So, granted that, you know, what we're trying to do is get IHEs to be able to support their candidates to pass these tests, because we believe that by passing these tests, it puts teachers in a position to best be able to serve our kids, right? But I imagine from state to state, you know, the instruments vary, right? So in
some states use the same ones, and you know.
Okay. In your professional opinion, how good of a job do these tests? Because the influence of a state board over the test is just, it's as much as the market kind of
I know,
allows,
I
right?
get that.
So what instruments would you consider to be good measures of true teacher competence and effectiveness, given all the factors that you include in your presentation, et cetera? So could you just kind of give us an idea of what instruments?
Well, I can tell you the qualities of a good instrument are, and that is, and you're already doing this, but you use a test that has, you're testing mathematics separately from science, separately from ELA, and separately from history and geography. And the reason to do that is there was a system in the United States where if you went in and did really well on the ELA part and had a really low score in math, that high score would compensate for the low score in math, even though you got to teach math. So you want to make sure that's separately scored. And and then you want to have a reasonable score, cut score needed to pass. But that, again, I understand and appreciate that what is reasonable. You know, how do you decide that? Now there is much more of a national, the testing companies will tell you this, here's a recommended cut score and you can choose to veer from it or not, but most states don't veer from it. But the process I'm suggesting is you need to be able to stand behind your tests. And if you can't, you need to entertain a process where you hire a group of experts who will review the tests to make sure they aren't trivial pursuit, but they are making sure teachers are going into classroom with pretty good knowledge. And then you need to do the same thing with reading. Reading is its own separate test. And then I think you need to be wary of some of the tests that are out there about cultural competence. But I do think you absolutely need to be addressing that through student teaching. And you can do so successfully. But just because something is important doesn't mean we know how to measure it. You know? So I wish there are decent measures for whether you know some history. There's very little decent measures to whether we have social-emotional learning going on. There's no really good test for social-emotional learning. So I'm like, well, how are we going to measure whether this is working?
So that's kind of the concern I have, because there's scholarship, right? But there's not a testing assessment, right? I give you a list of scholars who do a good job at measuring those things. But the problem is we're at the mercy of the test companies, so to speak, who heretofore have not really incorporated that into it. So the fear I have is that you choose one of 5 tests, whatever one's the best one. You then kind of tell the IHEs to conform to the test, assuming that these are actually measuring what's effective in the classroom. Whether or not that's true or not is only concerned. That's why I was wondering, like, which one?
Well, you have standards, right?
Yeah.
And those tests are supposed to be built off of your standards. So if you look at your standards and you can defend them, then by association, the tests should align. But I'm just saying, if you have any doubt that the tests don't align with your teaching standards, then you should be digging in. But I will tell you, the data I've given you today is similar. The pass rate data is similarly bad with other tests. So I gave you the pass rate data for the states that use 23 states that use the multi-subject Pierce ETS test, but it's just as bad in Florida, and they have their own test. They spent a lot of time and effort to get their own test, and the pass rate's just as bad. You know, in Massachusetts, they have the best reading standards in the country. Best standards to what a teacher needs to know about reading. Their pass rate on their reading test is 50%. We go and look at the programs. Are you teaching reading? It's the worst state in the nation in terms of who's teaching scientifically based reading. I'm like, how are they getting away with that? Why isn't anyone holding them accountable? You have a pass rate of 50%. If you think it's important for teachers to know how to teach reading, you as a board should have something to say to those programs that say, we're not doing it. You got your science, I got my science.
Thank you for that.
You know?
Mr. Buxton, and then Dr. Oxendine communicated that she would like to ask a question after Mr. Buxton.
Okay, thank you. Just a comment and a question. Timing is everything in lots of things. Your timing's about 3 months late on the licensure discussion. I think we're going to make it harder. We've made it harder in this state to do some of the things you're talking about and undermine some of our leverage on approving IHEs by making it able to hire folks on limited licenses who can't pass the licensure test for a period of years, for taking folks from out of state who can't meet our standards. Just a number of things that in with the reality of a teacher crunch, we've, I think, made some steps that are going to make it harder to get what you're suggesting we've got to do to ensure a clear level of quality. That said, timing is good in thinking about how we deal with a new teacher prep accountability system that, while it commits some of the sins you suggested in relying too much on on outcomes, does give us a chance to think about how we help programs improve. And I have no doubt that every one of our private and public institutions wants to run a great teacher education program. No question about that. Do have a question about how we help folks who have numbers that look like the ones you showed get better. And besides maybe Louisiana, who I think is trying to do this, not sure of anyone else who's really cracked the code of how we, in the same way we think about working with low-performing schools, how do we work with institutions to get better with their programs from where they are today, besides just shining a light?
Well, I'm not here to sell any other group, but there is an organization called TPIUS that will go into a program, and they've done some inspections here in the state. I believe Ellen had one done, and she really got a lot out of it, Ellen McIntyre. But they will actually hone in on, okay, you're doing terribly on the tests. Let's look and figure out what we can do to improve. You know, it's not a full inspection, it's more of a, you know, a review of what's going on, and really getting the institution to think beyond handing out test prep booklets, handing out remediation. That is not the way to go, you know. So they're helping them make fundamental changes to what happens to candidates when, because we don't want a situation where only the kids have had a great K-12 education. We don't want that for our teacher workforce today. We want to help higher ed be part of the solution, and they can be. We can do so much more. I'll make one point about teacher shortages as you guys grapple with this, because I bet you did not hear this in all your deliberation. You realize when you make it easier to get into the teaching profession and you reduce so many barriers, guess what happens? The kids at the top, the kids who have a lot of talent, black, brown, and white, and Asian, they become less and less interested in teaching. So think about that as an unintended consequence of making moves on teacher shortages, because you are essentially sending a signal to the kids, the talented kids. This is for the bottom. So you don't want to send that message, and it's very frustrating to programs too. They get a lot of pressure from their college presidents and provosts to fill every seat. And when they go back and say we need some standards here, they get told, no, fill the seats. So you'd be doing programs a favor in the long run by recognizing that teacher shortages, some of the solutions that are out there are really have a very adverse impact on the profession.
Thank you. Dr. Oxendine, are you there?
I am, thank you. My question goes back to some of your earlier points about producing strong teachers of reading, and that taking place in our EPTs, in our schools and our colleges of education. I don't know that I've ever heard much of a discussion around the teaching of reading, or any discussion about poor outcomes in reading, and then making some kind of link back to the preparation of our teachers about the pedagogy of teaching reading, the instructional approaches, and how the teaching of reading oftentimes is a bit different from, let's say, teaching some other content. Could you address that? Because I wonder if more doesn't need to happen at the classroom level in just the sheer understanding of teachers on how to teach, what is the best approaches for teaching, let's say, a lesson on comprehension.
So I hope I understand your question correctly. Teachers need a certain amount of content about reading. They need to hear what phonemic awareness is before they get into a classroom, but they don't just need to know what it is. They need to know how to assess whether a child is phonemically aware. The more and more research is coming out on the critical nature of phonemic awareness. And teachers need practice, and they need exposure, and we need good curriculum. They need to know how to diagnose. They can't always be in a position where they actually solve a child's teaching problem. Some of them are complex and require expertise. but teachers need to know how to recognize and address some of the more basic and common problems. And all of that should be part of a good reading course. You know, that should not be left up to the first time you're struggling. I've seen so many teachers in tears who, for years and years, were teaching reading the way they were told to teach it, which is basically teach how you think you ought to read. Teach how you want, without the benefit of thousands of years of experience of other of teachers, and without the benefit of the research. They're not even exposed to the truth. So they'll be in tears because they know what an injustice they committed upon their own students, and the hundreds of students that went through their doors who trusted them, and through no fault of their own, they did not provide their students what they needed.
Exactly. It's almost as though a surgeon must take X number of courses in surgical procedures. And it seems like that would be so necessary in learning how to deliver something.
But right, you be careful. Like Maryland, 25 years ago, said they announced overnight 4 reading courses. Everyone in the state needs 4 reading courses. And everyone's like, well, why 4? You know, there was nothing thought out. It was just the state board decided it. And then, you know, 5-10 years later, you look at what's the content of those courses. They have nothing to do with the science. You know, so you have to be very careful that I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but you're going from the state down to a classroom level. There's a lot that can happen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hartson-Dine. Mr. Chastain.
You mentioned that several different types of degrees, you know, if someone's looking at PA schools or looking at nursing schools or looking at law schools, they'll evaluate and see the pass rates. They're published, and matter of fact, a lot of these schools, if they're lesser known, if they have a really high pass rate, they use it for marketing real effectively. Like we're higher than UVA, or we're higher than this or that.
Yeah.
And that happens quite a bit. I just want to make sure I understand, our educational programs across the country, they don't publish pass rates ever? I mean, is there anybody who does it? I mean,
there are some
that's
states.
A shocking.
I'm telling you, this is shocking. Yeah. There are states that publish. There are a couple states, I believe, that publish institutional level data, which isn't bad. That's not bad, but you need to do first time pass rate. You need to do the final pass rate. How many times did they take it before they pass? You need to break it out by race and ethnicity, so you know you're doing a good job with all populations. No state does this. And so my organization wants to work very hard with states and programs, because this is in programs' interest as well. This is not being done to programs, but this data is something that matters. And so we're determined to see the public eye.
And they could market themselves. I mean, if
Right.
you do well, you share it in a.
Well, New York State put this data up when John King was, and John King is an African-American man, and when he was the chief in New York State, he put up the pass rate data for all the programs in the state. Very good website, very clear. You know, if you were looking around, shopping around, you'd know just what. That thing was up for 2 weeks after his departure. It's pulled down by the programs going in and complaining to the new chief. This is political. This is not easy. This is not easy. This is a political hot potato. But I hope we can persuade programs of the value of this. Maybe you could help me.
Ms. Kamnitz.
I'm looking at the slide that says, so why aren't states using this lever, which refers to why aren't boards like us using the power that we have. But JB's comment that all of these EPPs really want to be doing a good job. So why aren't they? Why aren't they changing? These are sort of the forces that may keep us from putting the pressure on them, but internally, what's keeping them from reacting to their own low pass rates and changing what they're doing? And then I also wonder, was there a time when this content was strongly embedded in the teacher curriculum, and were there forces that pushed away from that that have brought us to where we are today?
Yeah, those are both very good questions. The first one, why aren't programs wanting this public and why aren't they using it? It's embarrassing. It is, we've had states tell us that they don't want to make the data public because it's embarrassing to their programs and they don't want to embarrass them. Programs sometimes don't even know their data, and that's not their fault. We have come across many institutions in the course of our work on this issue who've told us they have a very high pass rate. And we said, you do? Well, that's unusual. And they gave us a report that they had gotten from the test publisher. And we looked at it and they said, reading this, if you don't read all of it, it looks like they have a very high pass rate. And then we did some digging because there was a column of very mysterious data. And it turned out that no, they didn't have a high pass rate. So the data that this institution had been getting, and I'm happy to share this example with you to show you, but it's more than you want to hear about this moment. But I'm happy to share with you what they were given from the test publisher that caused them to think they had a high pass rate, when in fact 25% of their candidates each year were failing. So we do not know why test publishers are not willing to, it's not clear to us what's going on with the test publishers. I know that the president of Pearson Assessment, when I asked him about this, he said that, I was right, that the nursing programs all publish their pass rate data. They insist upon it, and Pearson helped them do it. He said, nobody in education is requiring us to do that, and we're not going to do it, and we're not going to help you do it. So the other question was content. If you understand sort of what, and I've been around long enough to know, to watch this happen, these tests are relatively new. They all came about, there were some precursor tests, but the extensive testing we're seeing now is the result of a push in the 1990s to come up with some objective data on program performance. And then with the passage of No Child Left Behind in 2000, that too spurred states to adopt all these tests. And everybody had this very common sense view, and the programs were pushing it. They were saying, stop looking at every course we're teaching. Stop doing that. Just hold us accountable for our performance on these tests. And that was the line. So states withdrew all their course standards. You did, everyone did. So no longer is a requirement that North Carolina teacher candidates know general science, because that's considered, as you said, you talked about looking at inputs versus output. That's considered an input, and why does a state need to care how you teach general science? All you need to care about is whether they pass the test. Well, but the second part didn't happen. Everybody's doing the testing data is hidden. In some view, there are states which have said to testing publishers, "Don't give us our data because somebody might open records it. We don't want to see it." In another state, and this was told to me by a test publisher, that they said, "We'll meet you for our data, but across state lines because our open records laws don't apply." So we want to look at our data, but we don't want to take it across into our own state. This is a big problem.
Mr. Bristow-Smith, I believe you had a question.
Yeah, Ms. Walsh, I've read all of your advanced materials and excited to hear from you today. And I want to thank you for a very compelling presentation. I have a friend who says that we are all entitled to our own opinions, but we're not entitled to our own facts. And one of the things I deeply appreciate about your presentation is that the facts are undeniable. And growing up, my grandfather used to say, if you know better, you should do better. You have very clearly laid out for us a two-pronged approach that the state board, legislators, interested stakeholders can take to move our schools forward in terms of teacher preparation. One of those was EPPs and teacher prep. You could not have been more clear to us that we need to be very transparent about the quality of our programs and teachers passing licensure tests. I'd on record like to challenge every EPP program in our state for somebody to do that. And then for them to challenge each other. To Ms. Camett's point, just do it because you know your data and you want to take the courage to put it out there and hold your feet to the fire. I think that's essential. I'm a high school principal. I live in an age of accountability. I can tell you every teacher in my school's data. I can tell you my school's data. I can tell you my district's data. I can tell you when we're growing, when we're not growing. I can tell you my achievement data. I would love to see EPPs take their own lead on this, to Ms. Camett's point. Okay, I think that's critical. The second lever.
Before you go into your second one, they don't know their data, but we can go through that.
That's a problem.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Okay.
All right, now your second one.
But also encouraging that perhaps if they did.
You
they
have the
would do
power to
better.
give it to them,
Yes.
but they don't know it. Okay.
It sounds like there's another conversation that
Yeah.
needs to be had. The second point that you made, which we haven't touched on much, has to do with teacher pay.
Mhm.
And I hear from principals all across the state that they are looking for highly qualified candidates for the vacancies that they have. As a high school principal, I want to know where the candidates are in our state that are looking for positions. I want to know what compensation models I can offer them to attract them to high needs districts, to work with rural school systems. I want to know what their professional qualifications are. I wonder, do you know of other states in our country that have statewide jobs boards that are transparent about where vacancies are, which districts have flexibility in terms of compensation to attract candidates to those schools, what the qualifications are of those candidates? Can you just comment a little bit on like the teacher pay piece? One of your recommendations was raising base pay, that we're 22% behind comparable professions. I want to hear more about that, about the teacher pay and that particular part, because you gave us two levers, and that second lever seems worth talking about.
It's definitely worth talking about, and it's such a challenge. But I would encourage you to look at the state of Texas, what they're doing right now. They are putting in a system where districts are going to be able to pay teachers to work in high needs schools who are effective. And the early results from the 3 districts, I believe, that have done this, the student achievement results have been phenomenal. And that's going to go statewide. So that's called the ACE model, and it's definitely worth talking to them. They're probably in year 3 now, I believe, maybe 4. So they have some experience under their belt. But just generally speaking, anybody who tells you we're going to fix this problem by raising teacher pay 22%, they're wrong and they're right. I mean, we need to improve base pay, but we have to accept the fact that teachers who are able to do jobs that other teachers can't or won't do ought to have to get more money than the next guy. So a lot of people say to fix the national teacher shortage, we just need to raise everyone's pay. Well, the national teacher shortage, one, it doesn't exist. Every state has their own issue, and there's 50 different markets, and so the idea of a national teacher shortage is fiction. But we cannot go by this premise that we just need to make the profession attractive and that everybody gets the same. We have to recognize that science and math teachers are in desperate need of them, and until we pay more for them, they're going to be attracted to other professions. We have to understand that special ed, you as a board can encourage more dual certifications, so that elementary teachers get dual certification in special ed and regular, whatever they call the general elementary, so that they have the capacity to teach kids with special needs. There are some things you should do with more transparency about. There are very few states that put out good supply and demand reports. You guys are one of them. You have a very good supply and demand report out there, but it doesn't go into the detail that you're talking about. And so that too is a dilemma. There's nothing that's, there's nobody's, programs, we traditionally prepare twice as many elementary candidates as we need in this country, and we have for decades. So there's no shortage of elementary teachers generally, but if I'm a rural school in North Carolina, out in the middle of nowhere, I can't find elementary teachers.
Right.
Well, what's going to make somebody want to move to my city or my little town when they can get the same pay and be next door to Starbucks? They have to get more pay. And that falls in the state. So you can see I'm raising some pretty big ticket revenue issues with you, but it's essential. This shortage issue kind of comes up and down every 5 years and people run with it. It's the same shortage as we've had for decades because we are unwilling to make teaching operate the same way any other profession does, which adjusts for the labor market. You know, we think teaching is somehow immune from labor market forces. It's not. I wish it were.
Excellent. Any other
Thank you.
questions?
Thank you, sir.
Would you include in other high needs or schools that perhaps could be on some tiered pay, schools with a high proportion of low income students and a high proportion of students of color, since those schools also experience the highest rates of teacher turnover?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, without a doubt. Oh no, without a doubt.
Just put on the back burner. Not saying you, but whenever we had these conversations about high need schools or schools with systemically disadvantaged, we say STEM, we say math, and we often forget like those schools in particular.
Oh, and actually, I would put them at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it. Sorry.
That's the only way we're going to solve this problem of disproportionately poor performance of minorities, or no longer minorities, of black and brown kids on tests. We've got to change what happens in K-12. And on that note, we can all agree about that, right?
So we want to thank you for the time that you've taken to present this to us, for the data that's been shared. One comment from me, I certainly don't speak on behalf of Dr. Oxendine, but I do think it would be relevant and informational for Dr. Tomlin. I would never put you on the spot today, but I do think it would be very effective for us to take some of these national percentages and extrapolate those to North Carolina so that we can really get a good, deep look at what's going on in our state with our EPPs, with everything that we've discussed. This is certainly a critical issue. So
We can give you data down to the program level.
that would be fantastic.
But I think we have a handout. Did that get passed out? I don't know. Okay. But we can give you data at the program level about whatever you need that we've got. Though our data is being redone. It's 2016. We're getting out new data in early 2020. So, yeah.
Dr. Oxendine, do you have a parting comment before Ms. Walsh get back on the road?
No,
Hearing none from her, thank you so much.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. I hope I was coherent because I just got off a day and a half flying from South Africa. So I was like a little worried about my jet lag.
It was fantastic.
Okay.
So I'm a little depressed, but work to do, and we're called.
Oh, I hope you're not depressed. This is all doable. Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White, and thank you, Ms. Walsh. We welcome you back anytime and appreciate the challenge you've given us. So thank you to all staff and presenters for this September 5th, 2019 meeting. We wish everyone safe travels back to their respective destinations and hope for the best as we prepare for the projected arrival of Hurricane Dorian. The board will receive frequent updates and will work with the agency to respond to the needs of any impacted districts and schools as a result of this storm. And board members, this concludes our committee meetings for the day. Assuming no other business, I ask for a motion to adjourn. Motion by
So moved.
Mr. Buxton, second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Kamitz. Dr. Townsend Smith?
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Camden?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Vice Chair Gunn?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. We are adjourned.